Welcome to DarkVerse. I'm Isaac Nightshade, and tonight we gather around something that was never meant to burn again. A fire built on dares, on legends, on bones. When the fog moves like it remembers your name, when the lake reflects something that isn't standing behind you, and when the mask returns, but not on the face you fear, you'll understand. Some stories don't sleep. They smolder. This is The Last Campfire, a Jason Voorhees story. And you're not just hearing it, you're already part of it. Chapter 1. Ashes beneath the pines. The forest loomed like a sleeping beast, silent but not still. Towering pines lined the narrow dirt road, their jagged silhouettes shivering under a bruised evening sky. The only sound was the crunch of tires over gravel as a beat-up SUV rolled to a stop at a rusted, half-fallen sign. Camp Crystal Lake, closed by order of the state. The 6 teens piled out. Logan was the first to step into the clearing, his boots sinking into the wet mulch. The air smelled of moss and old smoke. His gaze swept the empty field where cabins once stood, now just rotted frames choked by vines. The lake glimmered faintly beyond, wrapped in a heavy fog that hadn't lifted since they'd arrived. "Dude, this place is perfect," Ash grinned, lighting a cigarette. "Cursed forest, dead camp counselors, and no cell signal. We're in horror movie heaven." "I still don't think this is funny," Maria muttered, arms crossed. "People died here." "That's the point," Trevor said, hoisting a backpack. "Reddit legend says if you light a fire on the old campgrounds, the dead come back to finish their stories." Danielle rolled her eyes. "So we're here to be haunted. Great." But Logan wasn't listening. He knelt near an overgrown patch of earth where a fire pit might have once been. Something poked through the soil, something charred and pale. He dug with his hands, heart quickening. The others gathered around as he unearthed it. Burnt bones, brittle and blackened. Nearby, melted plastic fused to metal. He picked it up, part of a counselor's name tag, warped by fire. The name, barely legible, made Logan's blood run cold. Voorhees. Silence. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Logan stood slowly. "My great-aunt. She worked here in '84. She vanished during the last camp massacre." Ash laughed nervously. "Well, that's encouraging." A breeze stirred. Pine needles rustled. Somewhere in the trees, a twig snapped. Night fell fast, as it always did in these woods. The group set up tents, but the unease lingered. Logan sat near the new fire, staring into the flames. The others joked and drank, trying to ignore the feeling that they were being watched. From the darkness, the forest watched back. Maria wandered toward the old mess hall ruins with Grace. They found collapsed beams and a child's drawing, half buried in dirt. It showed a boy in a lake, arms outstretched, eyes wide and hollow. The caption in shaky red crayon, "Mommy says I'm not dead." Back at the fire, the laughter stopped when Ash's phone buzzed. A distorted video began to play on its own. Static, then grainy footage. A masked man dragging a body through the woods, the image flickering as if caught between timelines. Then silence. The phone went dark. No battery, no signal. The wind shifted. The fire dimmed. Crunch. A heavy step in the dark. "Did you hear that?" Grace whispered. Trevor grabbed a flashlight. "Probably just a deer." But Logan's eyes were fixed on the trees beyond the firelight. Something was there, tall, unmoving, and just wrong. When the light swept over it, it was gone. Later, Trevor went to check the SUV. He didn't come back. They found him sprawled beside the vehicle, his neck snapped, eyes wide in terror. The hood was open, the engine gutted with surgical precision, wires hanging like veins. Rain began to fall. They dragged Trevor's body back, panicking. Radios didn't work, phones dead. They argued whether to stay or run. In the downpour, they saw it. Him, Jason, standing just at the edge of the tree line, still as a statue, his machete glinting under a flash of lightning, his breathing slow, mechanical, his mask cracked, caked with moss and time. He didn't move, didn't have to. They ran. Ash tripped. A heartbeat later, Jason was on him, machete rising and falling, with a sickening crunch. The others didn't look back. They found shelter in an old supply cabin, windows boarded, door barely holding. Rain leaked through the roof. Danielle sobbed in a corner while Maria bandaged Logan's arm, scraped from the run. There was no reason, Logan whispered. He didn't even hesitate. He doesn't, Maria said, almost to herself. My brother told me the stories. Jason Voorhees doesn't kill because he's angry. He kills because you're here. Outside, silence. Then a slow, deliberate knock on the wall. Then again, knock, knock, knock. A shadow passed the window. When morning came, only 3 remained, Logan, Maria, and Grace. They tried to reach the lake, thinking maybe a boat could be found, but the dock was destroyed. The lake was still, too still, like something below waited to surface. Maria stayed behind to create a distraction. She screamed. Flares lit the trees. She bought them seconds. And then, nothing. Logan and Grace made it to the trail. The air was lighter. Maybe they were out. But Logan stopped. He looked back. Jason stood at the tree line, just watching. Not moving, not chasing, just waiting. Weeks later, authorities found a single survivor at the ranger station. Grace, silent, blank-eyed. Wrapped in a blanket, she whispered only once. He didn't want to kill us. He just wanted someone to keep the fire burning. Later that year, hikers would speak of a new legend, a figure sometimes seen near the lake, smaller, quieter, but still wearing the cracked mask, still holding the machete, and somewhere deep in the woods, a fire still burns beneath the pines. Chapter 2. Warnings in the Wind. The wind rolled in off the lake just after sundown, carrying a chill that sank into the skin like needles. The 6 teens huddled around the fire, but its warmth did little to chase away the unease that had settled since Logan unearthed the scorched bones. The forest around Camp Crystal Lake had grown darker, denser, as if the trees themselves leaned closer. Each gust carried with it a whisper, not a voice, but something older, deeper. Ash stretched out, with a cocky grin, taking another swig from his flask. Seriously, guys, you're letting Campfire creepypasta get to you, he chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. It's just an old campsite. The only thing out here is raccoons and maybe some tweaked-out hermit. But his words were undercut by a sudden sound behind him. Thump, drag, thump. A slow, rhythmic sound like something heavy being pulled through wet leaves. Everyone went still. Probably a deer, Trevor mumbled, though he didn't believe it. The footsteps stopped just outside the glow of the fire. No one moved. Then from the lake a splash echoed, loud, unnatural, not the kind made by a fish or duck. It was the kind of splash made when something emerges. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Did anyone else hear that? Before anyone could respond, something knocked hard against the side of Maria's tent, twice. She screamed, leaping up. Logan rushed over and flung the flap open. Nothing was there, just the wind rustling the pines, the kind of wind that always feels like it's hiding something. Maria stood trembling, her flashlight shaking as she scanned the darkness. Then she saw it, an old wooden sign half buried under fallen branches near the tree line. She brushed it off, revealing the faded words, "Welcome to Camp Crystal Lake." Deep gashes tore across the letters, 4 jagged marks like claws. But it was no animal that left them. Something had scraped the wood with purpose. The group backed away from the sign in silence. That's when they noticed him. An old man stooped and swaying at the edge of the woods. His eyes were pale, cloudy like misted-over glass. He looked straight at them, though it was unclear if he could see at all. "You dug where you shouldn't," he rasped, voice like broken branches. "You've brought him back." Maria took a step forward. Brought who back? But the man had already turned. His figure vanished between the trees, swallowed by shadow. Ash started after him, but Logan grabbed his arm. "Don't. Just don't." That night, no one slept. The fire was left burning, but the darkness pressed in close. The wind no longer felt like wind. It felt like breathing. Maria lay awake, staring at the tent ceiling, hearing faint creaks that didn't belong to fabric. At some point past midnight, the noises returned. Footsteps, not stomping, not running, deliberate, measured. Something moving just beyond the tents circling them. A deep, wet crunch every few seconds, as if boots dragged through blood-soaked leaves. Then silence. Grace sat up and swore she saw a figure outside her mesh window, tall, broad, unmoving. No face, only the shape of a man whose head tilted just slightly, listening. When morning came, one of the backpacks was shredded. The food was untouched, but the first aid kit was missing. Next to it, in the damp earth, a giant footprint. Bare, calloused, human, but not. Logan stared at it, heart pounding. The toe was split as if the foot had once been crushed and never healed right. Jason Voorhees was real, and they had woken him. Chapter 3. Dreams of Drowning. Grace sat bolt upright in her sleeping bag, lungs gasping like she'd been underwater. Cold sweat plastered her shirt to her back. The echo of a scream, her own, still trembled through the woods, fading into the night like steam off the lake. Her hands clenched the fabric of the tent floor, and she stared, wide-eyed, as if the darkness inside the nylon walls might reach for her again. Outside, pine needles rustled under the slow breath of wind, and the lake lapped gently against the distant shore. But in her mind, she could still feel the cold hands wrapped around her ankles, pulling her down, the murmured voice of a boy, hoarse and wet, whispering, "He never died." Trevor stirred beside her and turned on his flashlight, the beam harsh against the tense shadows. "Grace, hey, it's okay." "You were dreaming." She shook her head, breath shivering. "No, not a dream. A memory. Or something else." Her voice faltered. "There was a boy in the lake. His skin was gray, like he'd been there forever. His eyes, they were leaking black water. He said—" She paused, staring at Trevor like he could somehow make sense of it. "He said Jason never died." Trevor looked away, suddenly uncomfortable, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe we should leave in the morning." Grace didn't respond. Her eyes drifted to the tent wall again, toward the lake beyond. As the sun rose behind the mist, the others began to stir. Logan said, little, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Maria sat by the fire, poking coals with a stick, jumpy at every noise. Danielle had already vanished by the time breakfast was discussed. No one had noticed. Danielle had wandered off before dawn, drawn by something she couldn't explain, a tug in her chest, like a memory she didn't know she had. She passed beneath ancient pine boughs that creaked softly, like bones grinding in their sockets. Her boots crunched damp needles as she approached what was once the camp's mess hall, now collapsed into itself like a mouth too tired to scream. Fog curled along the ground as she circled the ruins. That's when she saw it. A machete, rusted and dark with something more than time, was driven into the trunk of a dead tree like a blade in bone. Above it, nailed through the eye sockets, was a hockey mask yellowed by age, streaked with something brown and old. The sight rooted her in place. Wind stirred her hair, and for a moment she felt cold. Not from the air, but from something watching. Not behind her, beneath her. Like the ground itself remembered blood. Danielle reached out. Her fingers brushed the tree bark below the handle. A sharp sting bloomed across her palm, splinters or something worse, and she jerked back, eyes wide. The mask above the blade seemed to leer at her, though it didn't move. She turned and walked away quickly, wiping her hand on her jeans. The blood smeared dark against the denim. Back at the camp, Logan was pacing. She's been gone too long. Grace stood too. Let's go together. But the forest seemed thicker now. The paths they'd taken in looked unfamiliar. The branches curled tighter. Fog clung to their knees, and they were being watched. Every step echoed not just with their own weight, but with something heavier behind them. Crunch, pause, crunch. Grace looked back, sure she'd see someone. But there was nothing, only trees. They found Danielle near the mess hall ruins, staring into the woods. "We need to go," Logan said, grabbing her shoulder. But she didn't move. "I think I touched something," she whispered, voice flat. Something that belonged to him. She turned her hand over to show the deep gouge in her palm. 3 parallel lines. Logan stepped back, uneasy. That night, as the fire dwindled to glowing coals, the woods went silent. No owls, no bugs, just the sound of water lapping against the lake, shore, and the slow, deliberate crunch of boots on pine needles. Grace sat up in her tent. She knew that sound now. She would always know it. She crawled to the flap and peeked out. Jason Voorhees stood just beyond the firelight, motionless, his broad shoulders rising and falling with impossible stillness. His machete hung low in one hand, the blade black in the night. His mask, old, cracked, streaked, tilted just slightly toward her tent. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Grace didn't scream. She didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat. The others were asleep or pretending to be. Jason stepped forward, once, then again. Each step slow, methodical, final. Then the light of the fire flickered, and he was gone. Not vanished, moved, impossibly fast, deeper into the trees. Morning came like a lie. Danielle was gone. Her sleeping bag lay open, torn from the inside. No blood, just damp pine needles and a trail of footprints leading to the lake, where they stopped, as if she had walked into the water willingly. Grace knelt by the shore. She could still hear the boy's voice from her dream, whispering from beneath the surface. He never died. And deep below, something stirred. Chapter 4. The Mask Returns. Danielle stood at the edge of the camp, her hand hidden inside her sweatshirt sleeve, cradled close to her chest. Beneath the fabric, the wound had worsened, 3 angry blistered lines swelling up from her palm like something branded into her by fire or hate. The skin had turned a sickly yellow-gray, seeping in places, pulsing like it was alive. She hadn't told the others. Not even Maria, who kept glancing at her like she already suspected. Danielle kept quiet, afraid that speaking it aloud would give it more power. Something had changed since she touched the machete in the tree. Something inside her. The others tried to act normal, but the tension hung thick as the fog that never seemed to lift. That evening, while Logan stirred a pot of canned stew over the fire and Trevor fiddled with a useless walkie-talkie, a cold silence settled over the forest like a blanket of snow. No birds, no crickets, only the soft hiss of flames and the occasional creak of unseen branches. Then, without warning, the fire died. Not flickered out, died, snuffed like a candle in a vacuum. No wind, no movement, just gone. The camp sank into shadow. Trevor stood up immediately, clicking his flashlight on. The beam barely cut through the mist, now curling around the tents like fingers. "Something's wrong," he said. "We need to pack up and get the hell out of here." "No one's hiking through that fog," Logan replied, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. That's when Maria screamed. They rushed to her. She was standing beneath a tree just beyond camp, pointing up with trembling hands. Strung by its hind legs, swaying slightly in the still air, a deer hung upside down. Its chest was split open, carved crudely, the flesh peeled back into a jagged V that glistened in the fading light. Its tongue lolled, black and bloated. Blood soaked into the moss below. None of them spoke. The air felt heavier, now charged, electric. Trevor stepped forward, hand instinctively gripping the folding knife at his side. "This wasn't an animal," Maria whispered. "It's a warning." Ash broke the silence with a sharp laugh, nervous and bitter. "Okay, that's it. I'm done playing Camp Blood. This is some messed up deliverance crap. I'm finding a road and walking till I hit pavement." He stormed off, ignoring Logan's shouts to stop, disappearing into the fog with only his flashlight swinging at his side like a metronome. They waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Logan wanted to go after him. Grace begged him not to. They argued until Ash's flashlight beam reappeared between the trees. It wasn't swinging anymore, just floating, then dropping. No one moved. The beam blinked out. Logan called his name. No response. Just the distant creak of trees and something wet hitting the forest floor in steady drops. Then, faintly, the unmistakable drag of steel over bark, a low, rasping noise behind them. Trevor turned, and for a split second his flashlight caught something pale just beyond the trunks, a mask, cracked and aged, peeking from between the trees. Then it was gone. "Run," Danielle breathed. They scattered. In the confusion, Danielle ducked into the ruins of the mess hall, her hand now burning like it was being gripped by fire itself. Her breaths came in gasps, fogging in the cold air. She stumbled through the half-rotted doorway, her boots crunching glass. Every board she stepped on creaked like a scream. She turned to close the door. Jason was already there. He didn't lunge. He didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway, machete hanging at his side, soaked in something dark. His mask was wrong, older, like it had grown from the trees themselves, bone-white and moss-streaked. His breathing was slow, mechanical, like an ancient machine reawakened. Danielle backed away, her injured hand pulsing. She didn't scream. She knew this was inevitable. Somehow, when she touched the machete, she had become part of this place, part of him. Jason stepped inside. Each footfall made the floor groan. Danielle raised her shaking hand as if that alone might stop him. Jason raised the machete. A blur. Trevor crashed through a side window, tackling Jason just long enough for Danielle to scramble out. She heard one blow, a wet crack, then Trevor's scream cut off into a horrible gurgle. She didn't look back. She ran blindly into the woods. The fog had lifted slightly, and through the gaps in the trees, the moon lit the path. Rain began to fall, soft and icy, soaking her hair, plastering her sweatshirt to her skin. Every branch that snapped made her flinch. Every gust of wind felt like breath on the back of her neck. She reached the camp breathless. Only Maria and Grace remained. Logan, gone. Ash, gone. Trevor, likely dead. Danielle collapsed to her knees, clutching her. Blistered hand. The pain had changed. It wasn't just burning. It was growing colder, spreading up her wrist like frostbite. "We can't leave," she whispered. "Not anymore." Maria knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "We have to try. Danielle, look at me. We'll find a way out." Grace stood a few feet away, staring into the trees. Her voice was distant. "He never wanted us. Just one of us." Maria turned to ask what she meant. Grace didn't answer. She just walked into the woods. Danielle clutched her hand, watching her go, and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, something worse, something familiar. The kind of silence that meant he was still out there, watching. And somewhere in the ruins of the mess hall, Jason cleaned his blade in the rain, unmoved, unhurried, waiting for the night to fall again. Chapter 5. Blood in the Leaves. Dawn broke over Camp Crystal Lake with a brittle gray light, cold and colorless, filtering through the mist like a dying breath. The forest held its silence like a secret, heavy and wet. Logan was the first to find Ash. His scream brought the others stumbling from their tents, already dreading what they would see. The body was wedged against a jagged pine, suspended unnaturally. His spine bent completely backward over a broken trunk, his head lolling. Upside down, face frozen in a rictus of agony. His eyes were open. His mouth was wide, mid-scream, as if the sound had been ripped from him and never released. Ash's phone, still clutched in one rigid hand, crackled with static. No service, no signal. But it played something. Not a voice. Not music. Just low, garbled static, like a transmission caught from another time, or place or plane. Trevor staggered back, vomiting into the leaves. Grace knelt beside the tree, shaking. Danielle stood frozen, her blistered hand tucked into her jacket, pain radiating through her arm like barbed wire under the skin. "We leave," Trevor said, wiping his mouth. "Today. Now." "No," Logan said, his voice steady in a way that made the others stare. "There's something here. My great-aunt, she vanished in these woods in 1984. No trace. Not even a body. But I found her name on that tag. I need to know what happened." Maria put a hand on his arm. "You think this has something to do with you?" "I think it has something to do with all of us," he replied. "Something old. Something that doesn't forget." Trevor shook his head. "You're crazy. You saw Ash. You think that was a bear." Danielle said nothing. Her eyes were on the trees, scanning the shadows. She hadn't told them what she'd seen the night before, the pale figure standing just past the firelight, tall and still, the air around him humming with dread. She hadn't told them about the mask in her dreams, or the way she felt something watching her even now. She kept those truths locked inside like something toxic. "I saw nothing," she said, and felt her stomach twist at the lie. The day passed in tense silence. No one strayed far. The forest felt tighter than before, like the trees were leaning in, listening. Trevor tried the radio again. Nothing. The batteries had been drained, not dead, drained like the energy had been pulled out by something unseen. Later, while checking the old ranger's shed near the lake, Maria found a child's drawing nailed to the inside of a cabinet. Faded, water-damaged, but still visible. A boy with a round face stood at the lake's edge, crying. In the water behind him, a masked figure loomed, half submerged, machete in hand. Across the top, in crude red crayon. He never went away. That night, the wind picked up. Rain fell in sharp needles, hissing through the pine boughs. Grace tried to sleep, but each time she closed her eyes, she saw water, endless, black, swallowing her whole. In the dream, a child whispered. He watched from the bottom, until someone brought him back. Maria sat alone by the dying fire, jacket zipped to her chin, eyes hollow. She thought of her older brother, a summer counselor here years ago. He had vanished with his group. Everyone assumed he'd drowned. But there'd been no funeral, no body, no goodbye. Only a severed boot and a zipped tent full of blood. She had come here not for fun, not for a dare, but for closure. And now she knew why there had never been any. Jason Voorhees didn't leave bodies. He left warnings. In the woods, something moved. Maria turned quickly. Nothing. But then, a crunch. Deliberate. Close. She reached for her flashlight, hands shaking, and shone it toward the sound. Between two trees stood Jason, still and expressionless, rain slicking off his cracked hockey mask, machete gleaming at his side. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Maria backed away slowly, heart pounding so hard she couldn't hear the rain anymore. She turned to run and found Trevor. They hid together in the mess hall ruins, breath shallow, hands over mouths. The rain dripped through the broken beams, tapping like fingers on bone. Somewhere outside, the floorboards creaked. Not footsteps, weight, purpose. Jason was near, watching, waiting. Then, a scream from camp. Grace. Trevor bolted. Maria hesitated a second too long, and when she stepped outside, he was already gone. Just his flashlight spinning on the trail, pointing up into the trees. Maria ran. The woods blurred. The trees groaned. Blood coated the leaves like paint. At camp, Logan and Danielle were trying to calm Grace, who insisted someone had dragged their tents into a perfect circle, a circle that hadn't been there an hour before. A symbol. Danielle's hand throbbed, ice cold now, nearly. Purple. The skin had cracked open, revealing something underneath, something darker than blood. In the center of the tent circle, a shape waited. Not a person. Not quite. Just a figure in the rain, standing among them as if he'd always been there. Jason Voorhees did not charge. He did not scream. He walked as inevitable as nightfall, as slow as death. They ran. Only Maria looked back, and when she did, she saw Logan standing his ground, his eyes locked on Jason's, his hands trembling, his lips moving. "I know who you are," Logan whispered. Jason raised the machete. The rain muffled the scream. In the morning, the woods were silent again. Maria, Danielle, and Grace emerged from the underbrush, soaked and shivering. No bodies, no blood, no Jason. Just a phone, ashes, lying in the mud, still hissing with static. Danielle turned to the trees. She felt him out there, still watching. The forest never gave back what it took. And camp. Crystal Lake was never meant to let anyone leave whole. Chapter 6. Footsteps in the rain. The sky split open without warning. Rain fell in cold, stabbing sheets, not driven by wind, just falling, vertical, relentless. The campsite was instantly consumed by wet and noise. Grace stood outside her tent, blinking through the downpour as the fire guttered and died. Thunder didn't roll. There was no lightning, just water, endless water, the kind that felt less like weather and more like warning. Tents collapsed under the weight, their poles snapping like brittle bones. The ground turned to sludge, and already their gear was soaking, useless. Logan cursed and tried to haul a tarp over what remained of their supplies. Danielle sat motionless, the sleeve of her sweatshirt soaked through where she clutched her arm. Beneath it, her hand had gone numb. That was when Grace noticed the footprints. They circled the campsite, massive, bare, and fresh, toes splayed, arches deep, the pads thick and calloused. They hadn't been there minutes ago. Rain fell so hard it should have erased them instantly, but they remained, pressed into the mud with inhuman weight. Grace stared at them and felt a coldness worse than the rain settle in her bones. In her duffel bag, something shifted. She unzipped it and found a child's sketchbook that didn't belong to her. Pages stuck together with dampness, but when she peeled them apart, she saw the drawings, crude, frantic crayon lines. A small boy drowning in a lake. The same boy crawling out of water, face twisted in fury. Then the boy wearing a mask, holding a knife, holding a machete. A final page showed the boy grown and faceless, standing over bodies that looked too much like them. "Where did this come from?" she asked, voice small. No one had an answer. Trevor snapped, "I'm not waiting to die out here like some goddamn horror trope." He grabbed his flashlight and sprinted for the car, sloshing through the rising puddles. The others tried to stop him, but his panic drowned them out. Grace watched him vanish into the curtain of rain. A minute passed, then another. A scream echoed, sharp, short, then silence. They ran after him. Logan's flashlight beam bounced wildly through the trees until it struck the car parked just off the service trail. The driver's side door was wide open. The tires were shredded to the rim, rubber strings clinging to the mud like entrails. The inside of the windshield was smeared, red, as though something had burst inside and painted it from within. Trevor was gone. Danielle stood still, staring at the tree line. Rain ran in rivers down her face, but she didn't blink. "He's close," she whispered. "Who?" Logan asked, though he already knew. "Jason." No one argued anymore. The name didn't feel silly now. It felt real, heavy in the mouth, like something summoned. They returned to the campsite, but it no longer felt like shelter. The fire pit was drowned, their food soaked. Grace checked her bag again. The sketchbook was gone, just wet clothes and a flashlight with dying batteries. That night, they didn't try to sleep. They sat together under the tarp, the storm lashing around them. Each sound, the crack of a branch, the splash of water, the creak of trees, made their hearts stop. Then came the footsteps again. Slow, measured, deliberate. They weren't approaching. They were circling again, like a predator testing a snare. The crunch of boots through pine needles, the squelch of mud. Danielle stood up, soaked and shaking. She turned to the trees and stared into the dark. "He's watching," she said. "He remembers us." "Why us?" Maria asked, voice cracking. "Because we're here," Danielle whispered. "Because we brought him back." There was a crash then, something heavy falling onto one of the tents, collapsing it entirely. They turned their flashlights toward the sound and saw it. Jason, standing in the middle of camp, unmoving, rain dripping from his mask, down his massive frame. His machete dragged behind him, cutting a line through the mud. He didn't run. He never did. He walked. Maria screamed. Logan grabbed her hand and pulled. Danielle and Grace ran into the woods, the light from their flashlights bouncing wildly between the trunks. Behind them, the sound of boots. The slow, steady pursuit of something that never tired. Branches slapped against their faces. The rain stung. Grace tripped and fell, splashing into a puddle that stank of rot and old blood. She scrambled up. Danielle turned to help. Her flashlight caught Jason in the distance. He had stopped just for a moment, as though he recognized her. as though her wound, the one from the machete tree, marked her somehow. Then he moved again. They ran until their legs failed. They found shelter in the hollow remains of a ranger's station. The door hung from a single hinge, and the inside stank of mildew and mouse droppings. But they barricaded it the best they could. "We can't keep running," Logan said, breath ragged. "There's no outrunning him." Danielle sat on the floor, rainwater pooling around her. Her fingers brushed something under the cot. She pulled out a rotted photograph, a camp counselor smiling, a young boy beside her. On the back, in faded pen, "For Pamela, always watching from shore." The boy's face was pale, familiar. She stared at it until her hands trembled. Jason had never left. He had always been here, waiting, watching, and now they were part of his ritual. Outside, something stepped onto the creaking floorboards of the porch. One slow step, then another. The door groaned, and they realized they were never meant to survive the night. Chapter 7. The Cabin in the Fog. The rain didn't stop. It became the air itself, soaking them to the bone, clinging like a second skin. Grace, Logan, Maria, and Danielle ran blind through the trees, guided only by instinct and fear, crashing through underbrush, their breath ragged and too loud. Behind them, somewhere in the drenched woods, they could still hear it, the drag of steel across wet ground. Jason's presence wasn't a chase. It was a certainty. He did not need to run. He simply moved, and the world reshaped around his intent. Fog unrolled between the trees like smoke from some unseen fire. It rose in thick white walls, turning every tree into a shadow, every shadow into a threat. The group stumbled upon the structure by accident, a sagging cabin hidden in the mist like a memory. Moss crawled up the sides. Shingles had long since fallen. Windows were boarded or shattered. An old wooden sign above the door read, "Infirmary," barely legible beneath. Decades of rot. They had no choice. They pushed inside. The scent hit them first, mold, decay, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. The floor groaned under their weight. The walls, once white, were stained brown and green. Empty cabinets stood ajar. A rusted gurney sat in the center, its cushions split, stuffing spilling like entrails. On the far wall, yellowed photographs were still pinned with rusty tacks. Grace moved to them, eyes wide, lip trembling. One photo caught her breath in her throat. A group of counselors, arms draped over each other, smiling wide. Sunlight caught their hair, and behind them the lake shimmered. One of them, familiar, stood near the back. Logan stepped forward and stared. "That's her," he said. "That's my great-aunt, Karen." His voice cracked. She looked so alive, so untouched. But next to her, standing stiffly with arms at his sides, was a boy, unsmiling, unblinking, with eyes like still water. Jason. Before the lake. Danielle dropped to her knees, shaking. "He was always here," she said, voice trembling. "Even then, even before it all." She clutched her temples. "I've been hearing things. Voices, not words, just breathing. Like he's inside the fog, watching, waiting." Grace knelt beside her, but her expression was distant. "He's not a man," she whispered. "Not anymore. He's sorrow in human skin. That's all that's left." Her fingers brushed the edge of a broken window. "He doesn't kill because he wants to. He kills because this place remembers." A branch cracked outside. They all froze. Through the busted window, the fog parted for only a heartbeat, and Jason stood there, framed by mist, machete at his side, rain streaking down the cracked mask like tears. His shoulders rose and fell with unnatural slowness, as if the act of breathing was just another echo from when he was still human. His head tilted. No movement. No sound. Then he vanished. They backed away from the windows, sealing the boards as best they could. Danielle sat curled in a corner, mumbling to herself. Maria clutched a rusted pair of scissors like they were anything but useless. Logan checked the doors again, though the lock was long gone. Every creak outside made their skin crawl. Grace didn't move. She just stared at the old photo like it held the answers, like she might step into it and find a time before all of this. Outside, the fog shifted. Floorboards groaned, not theirs. Bootsteps, slow, heavy, unavoidable. Jason didn't need a door. He could tear through the wall if he chose, but he didn't. Not yet. Inside the cabin, their world shrank to the pulse in their ears, the soft patter of blood dripping from somewhere unseen, the smell of rust and old pain. Logan held a rusted metal rod and stood by the entrance, jaw clenched. "If he comes in," he said, "we fight." But they all knew the truth. You didn't fight Jason Voorhees. You survived him. Or you didn't. The fog swirled again. Jason was gone. But they could feel him, just beyond the trees, just beyond the wall, just beyond reason. And in that rotting infirmary, as night fell again and the storm raged on, it wasn't the cold or the dark or the silence that terrified them most. It was the knowing. He was still out there, and he never stopped walking. Chapter 8. One by one. The storm had no intention of ending. Wind howled through the trees like a scream trapped in the throat of the forest, and the fog swelled so thick it devoured the light from their flashlights, leaving only a gray void beyond the walls of the infirmary cabin. Inside, Logan, Maria, Grace, Danielle, and Trevor worked quickly, jamming broken furniture and splintered bed frames against doors and windows. It was a laughable defense. The wood was too old, the nails too rusted, and the thing outside, Jason Voorhees, wasn't something you kept out with planks and prayers. Trevor stood by the back door, gripping a busted length of pipe like it was more than a piece of rusted metal. He didn't look at the others as he whispered, "We should run." "Split up. He can't follow all of us." Danielle shook her head violently. "That's what he wants. He waits, watches, picks us off when we're alone." She sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than the rest of them, but it didn't matter. A crash like thunder split the room as the back wall exploded inward, rotted timber scattering like bones. Jason stepped through the wreckage, massive, soaked, breathing slow. He held Trevor by the neck, lifting him like he weighed nothing. Trevor's eyes bulged. His scream died in his throat as Jason's machete came down in a single final swing, splitting him nearly in two, the blade shrieking against bone. Blood hit the floor like paint. Danielle screamed and bolted through the front door, out into the storm and the fog. The others had no time to follow. Jason turned his mask toward them, the cold void of it more terrifying than rage could ever be. Logan grabbed Maria and Grace, dragging them down through the trap door to the cabin's cellar. They slammed it shut just as the floorboards overhead groaned with Jason's weight. It wasn't safety. It was a delay. The cellar was damp, earth-walled, and rank with the smell of mold and age. Shelves lined with ancient jars collapsed at Logan's shoulder as he fumbled in the dark. Grace clutched Maria, who had begun tearing through the boxes and crates scattered in the shadows, her hands moving with a strange desperation. She found it wedged beneath a collapsed shelf, a small, leather-bound diary, swollen from moisture but intact. She opened it, and the name scrawled on the inside cover twisted her gut. Pamela Voorhees. The entries were scattered. disjointed, ink running from tears or time. They spoke of loneliness, grief, hatred for the counselors who had failed her son, a son who couldn't swim, a boy left to drown. Then the final entry. He never forgave us for letting him drown. Neither did I. We buried him, but he came back, hollow and cold. My sweet Jason is gone. What walks now is not my son. It is what he became when the lake forgot him. Maria dropped the book. Her hand shook. Grace sat still, staring at the dirt floor. "He's not killing us for fun," she whispered. "This is what the lake made him. This place, it feeds him." Logan paced, panic rising. "We have to go. We have to burn this place to the ground. All of it. The lake, the woods, everything." Above them, the sound of boots creaked on the floorboards again. Then silence. Then the cellar door creaked open. They didn't breathe. Jason didn't descend. He just stood there, a silhouette backlit by lightning. Water dripping from his mask, machete red with Trevor's blood. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't have to. His stillness was its own terror. He was the end of all things. The quiet after the scream. But something pulled him away. A sound in the woods. Movement. Danielle. He turned and vanished again. They stayed hidden until the footsteps faded. Logan climbed up first, flashlight shaking. The room above was empty. The walls still broken. The floor still slick with blood. One by one they emerged, hollow-eyed. Outside, the storm was calming, but the fog remained. Danielle was gone. Grace stood at the edge of the trees, arms crossed. "He's not just hunting, he's choosing." Maria looked at her sharply. "Choosing what?" Grace turned. "Who stays? Who joins him?" The woods were silent. No birds, no life. Only fog and trees, and the feeling of being watched. Logan looked down at his muddy boots, then back at the cabin. The photo still hung on the wall. His great-aunt smiling. Jason beside her, unsmiling, like he already knew what was coming. And now it was happening again, one by one. Chapter 9. The Bone Trail. Danielle ran until her legs refused to carry her, every branch whipping at her face like claws, every breath burning in her lungs. The forest had changed, become tighter, crueler. The trees no longer stood still. They loomed, leaning inward as though guiding her somewhere. She didn't realize until she stumbled out of the underbrush that the path beneath her feet was lined with bones, some cracked, some clean, some still bearing the tatters of rotted cloth. The clearing ahead was death given form. It was a shrine, a graveyard of everything Jason Voorhees had touched. Half-collapsed camp signs leaned drunkenly against piles of shattered radios and splintered oars. Mold-covered sleeping bags lay like shed skins among half-buried helmets and blood-crusted lanyards. And bones, so many bones, arranged deliberately in circles, in stacks, in lines pointing to the center where a rotted canoe sat upright like a coffin. A child's sweater, mossy and faded, hung from its bow like a flag of mourning. Danielle choked on her breath and turned to run. But she didn't get the chance. Jason was already there. Not running, not leaping. Just there, towering behind her, machete slick with rain and blood, mask gleaming through the mist like a skull carved from ivory. She opened her mouth to scream. It came out once, then silence. The clearing absorbed the sound like the woods themselves had learned to feed on terror. And just like that, Danielle became part of the shrine, another bone for the trail. Back at the infirmary, the cabin was quiet again. The storm had dwindled into a steady drizzle, and the fog clung low to the ground like a creature nesting. Grace sat cross-legged in the middle of the room, her face pale and still, whispering to someone only she could see. "He wasn't born a killer," she said softly, as Logan and Maria searched the corners of the building for anything useful, tools, maps, weapons, answers. "He was a boy, just a little boy. He drowned, and no one helped him. No one even looked." Maria shot her a glance. "Grace, now's not the time." But Grace continued, voice distant. "He comes back because he never left, because he doesn't know how. He's still drowning over and over." Logan crouched beside her. "Grace, listen to me. He isn't a ghost. He's a killer. He tore Trevor apart. We saw it." "But that wasn't him," she whispered. "Not really. It's what the lake made him. What grief made him." Outside, something brushed against the cabin wall. Not an animal. Not the wind. A dragging sound, wet and low. Maria pressed her back to the wall, clutching the rusted machete they'd found earlier. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to scream at Grace, to force her to move, to fight, to run. But Grace just stared ahead, eyes unfocused. "I think I can talk to him," she said. "I think he remembers pain. Maybe not words, but feelings." Loss. The window behind her darkened. A shape passed in front of it, massive, impossible, quiet. Jason was outside. Logan mouthed, "Don't move." But Grace stood, slowly, calmly, as if walking into church. She approached the window and whispered, "Jason." Nothing. She placed her hand on the cracked glass. "You don't have to do this." Outside, the fog swirled. Nothing moved. Then, a bootstep, heavy, measured. Jason emerged from the fog at the tree line, machete hanging low, blood dripping from the blade into the soft mud with dull plops. He stood like a statue carved from grief. Grace opened the door. "No," Maria hissed, but Grace stepped out, barefoot on the slick pine needles, her thin shirt clinging to her skin, hair soaked. The rain was so soft now it sounded like whispering. She approached him. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "None of this was. You were just a child." Jason didn't move. "You just wanted someone to care." He tilted his head, just slightly. Then he raised the machete. Maria screamed. Logan grabbed her, pulling her back as the blade came down. But it didn't land on Grace. It struck beside her, into the earth. Jason stared at her, breathing slow, still, and then he turned and vanished into the fog. Grace dropped to her knees. Maria ran to her. "What the hell was that? Why didn't he kill you?" "I think," Grace said, trembling, "I reminded him of his mother." The rain picked up again. Wind rustled the trees, and far in the distance, deep in the woods, the sound of metal scraping wood echoed. Jason preparing again, because he hadn't stopped, and he never would. Grace may have been spared, but the others wouldn't be. The lake never forgives, it only waits. Chapter 10. Machete and Memory. The fog clung to the forest like rot, thick and damp, muffling every sound except for the distant, slow crunch of something enormous moving through the trees. The night had no stars, no moon, just the dying hiss of rain on pine needles and the sharp, panicked breath of the last 3 survivors. Maria pressed a flare into Logan's hand and whispered her plan. "He wants me. I'll lead him away." "No," Logan said, shaking his head. "We stay together." "We won't survive together," she cut in, eyes burning. "But you might if he's chasing me." Grace tried to stop her, but Maria was already moving, boots crunching through mud, hand gripping an old counselor's whistle she'd found hanging from a rusted peg in the infirmary. She raised the flare, igniting it with a violent spark that painted the woods red and screamed into the night like blood on fire. The whistle shrieked with her breath. "Hey!" she yelled into the dark. "Come get me, you bastard!" The flare lit the trees in jerking shadows, and in one of them, he appeared. Jason Voorhees. His mask was cracked and gleaming wet, his clothes soaked through, moss clinging to his shoulders like he had risen from the earth itself. He didn't run. He simply turned and moved after her. Maria ran. The flare cast sharp shadows behind her, her own fear chasing her across the wet terrain. She didn't look back until the light sputtered, and she saw him again, closer now, machete raised. She blew the whistle one last time, and then silence. Logan and Grace heard the scream cut short. No struggle, just a sharp gasp swallowed by the trees. Grace stood frozen. Logan grabbed her wrist and pulled. The lake. Now. They crashed through the forest, branches clawing their faces, mud grabbing at their feet. Grace could barely see, but she recognized the curve of the shoreline. The dock had collapsed, but the canoe was still half submerged at the edge. "We're getting out," Logan gasped. "We're getting out." They reached the canoe just as the surface of the lake began to ripple. Grace froze. "Wait!" From the water, something rose, slow, deliberate, impossible. Jason emerged, water sluicing from his body in thick sheets. His boots thudded into the shallows. The lake, it seemed, didn't want to hold him anymore. He stood tall and still, like the lake itself had given him up. Logan raised the machete they'd recovered from the old tree. Its blade was pitted and red with rust, but it was the only thing they had. "Go!" he shouted at Grace. "Get in the boat!" Jason took a step forward. Logan lunged, machete arcing down. It struck Jason's shoulder with a wet thud and shattered. The rusted metal broke like glass. Jason turned his head slowly, gaze falling on Logan, and then he grabbed him, one massive hand closing around Logan's chest, lifting him like a doll. With a roarless swing, Jason hurled him into the nearest tree. Logan hit it with a sickening crunch, body crumpling in the mud. "Logan!" Grace screamed, falling to her knees. Jason didn't chase. He turned to her. He stood there, dripping, unmoving, just breathing. Grace got to her feet. She didn't run. She walked toward him, each step slow, measured. Her eyes locked on his mask. "I know who you are," she whispered. "You weren't always this." Jason remained still. "You were just a boy," she said. "A boy no one cared about. A boy they let drown. I saw the pictures. I read her words. You were loved." For the briefest moment, the rain eased. "You remember her, don't you? You remember her voice?" Jason didn't move. "I'm not your enemy," Grace said. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I understand why you're angry, why you won't stop." The fog curled around them both like a curtain drawn on a stage. "Let me go," she said softly. "Let this end." Jason raised the machete and paused. The rain whispered again. Then, with a slow, almost reverent motion, he lowered the blade. Grace stood frozen, watching. Jason turned and walked into the lake, not sinking, just disappearing, swallowed by fog, by silence, by the weight of memory, as though the lake had called him home again. Grace stumbled to Logan's broken body and knelt beside him. His breathing was shallow. His eyes flickered. "He stopped," she whispered. "I think I reminded him of her." But even as she said it, the fog curled tighter, and a bitter wind cut through her. The lake was still, too still. She looked up, and on the far shore, through the mist, stood another figure, smaller, thin, a child, staring. Jason wasn't alone anymore. The lake never truly gives up its dead. It simply waits for more. Chapter 11. The Final Silence. The sky was pale with the coming dawn, but the sun had not yet broken the tree line. The woods were quiet, too quiet, like the forest itself was holding its breath, unwilling to disturb whatever had just happened. Fog drifted low and slow across the surface of Camp Crystal Lake, curling like smoke around the old dock, clinging to the blood-slick grass, slinking back into the trees as if it had seen enough. Grace stood at the water's edge, bare feet sunk into the mud, her clothes soaked and cold, her breath visible in the chill. Jason Voorhees loomed before her, silent as ever, water dripping from his soaked frame, steam rising faintly from the surface of his mask. He was so close she could see the moss growing at the seams of his jacket, the long scars across his forearms, the hollow emptiness behind the mask's eye holes. She didn't flinch. "I see you," she whispered. "Not what they made you. Not the stories." Jason tilted his head. "I see the boy. The one they forgot. The one they let drown." Stillness. Grace reached out, slowly, and with hands that didn't shake, she touched the sides of the mask. Jason didn't stop her. His breath, slow, mechanical, fogged the space between them. "I know you don't want this anymore," she said. "You were lost, and no one ever came to find you." Jason reached up with both hands. His gloves, soaked and frayed, brushed hers. Carefully, deliberately, he lifted the mask from his own face, but didn't let her see. Instead, he turned it toward her, then placed it in her hands. And Grace let him. She bowed her head as he slipped the cracked, blood-streaked mask over her face. Her vision narrowed through the warped eye holes. The world dimmed, dulled, distorted. Jason stood before her for a moment more. Then, without a word, because he has never spoken, he turned and walked into the lake. Each step was heavy. Water welcomed him. By the time he reached, waist-deep, the fog had already wrapped around his shoulders like a funeral shroud. Then he was gone. No splash, no ripple, just still water and silence. Grace emerged some time later, alone, soaked to the skin and shivering. She walked through the ruined woods, past blood-stained branches, past crumpled tents, past shattered memories. The sun finally rose, casting a weak, pale light over the devastation. She returned to the old fire pit where it all began, the one where they'd uncovered the scorched bones, where Ash had laughed and Maria had warned and Logan had believed. Now only ashes remained. Grace sat beside the cold fire. The mask rested in her lap, heavier than it should have been, as if it carried the weight of everything that had happened. She looked down at it and smiled, just barely. The silence deepened. The birds didn't return. The trees stood still, and in the distance, somewhere across the lake, a twig snapped. Grace didn't move, because now she understood. Jason wasn't gone. Jason never leaves. He just waits for the grief to return, for the lake to remember. And now someone else knew how it felt to be forgotten, drowned by the world. The final silence wasn't peace. It was inheritance. Chapter 12. The New Legend. The forest had begun to reclaim Camp Crystal Lake. Pine needles gathered like velvet over blood-soaked soil, and wind whispered through the bones of crumbled cabins. Nature was a slow, indifferent undertaker. Weeks passed. Search crews came and went, their radios filled with static, their calls unanswered. They found scraps, shredded tents, dried blood, the shattered remains of an old counselor's whistle. No bodies, no survivors, just absence. The 16s who had ventured into the woods were declared missing, presumed dead. Another mystery for the urban legend mill to grind into Reddit threads and campfire tales. Another warning ignored. The authorities sealed off the area again. Unstable terrain, they said. Unsafe structures. But the locals knew better. They always had. There were whispers in the diner in town. Murmurs from the bait shop clerk who refused to rent boats after dark. Old stories resurfaced of the owl boy who drowned, of his mother's revenge, of the murders, of the man in the mask. But now there were new sightings, different, stranger. It started with two hikers, a young couple taking selfies near the old fire pit. They laughed at the warning signs, called it creepy and cute. But that night only one of them came back, soaked, silent, staring. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink, just kept murmuring. She didn't make a sound. Then came the reports from campers, late-night glimpses, a figure at the tree line watching, slender, still. Not Jason. They said it was a woman now. They said she wore his mask. Not perfectly. It hung a little crooked, the cracked lower half revealing the curve of her jaw, pale and motionless. She never moved fast, never ran. But wherever she stood, fog followed. Cold settled, and if you locked eyes with her, even from across the lake, you felt it, something ancient and hollow staring back. They said she didn't speak. That was the worst part. No threats, no screams, just silence thick as smoke. She didn't leave behind bodies. Not always. Sometimes just blood, sometimes nothing. But always when someone vanished, someone else had seen her, standing at the edge of the woods, waiting. One ranger, new to the area, tried to investigate alone. He found her footprints near the shore, bare but small, feminine. He followed them for a mile before they just stopped, as if she disappeared into the trees or melted into the fog. His radio died. He came back, changed. Wouldn't go near the lake again. Wouldn't say why. Others weren't so lucky. They say Jason Voorhees is gone, that he finally sank back into the lake's cold heart. But legends don't die, they change. Now in his place there is someone else, or something else. A girl who stared into the face of grief too long, who understood it, welcomed it. Some say it's Grace, the last to be seen, the only one whose body was never found. Others say it's Jason's spirit, reborn in her sorrow, in her silence. No one knows for sure. No one dares ask. But everyone in the county agrees on one thing. Don't go near the lake after dark, because the new legend doesn't forgive, and it wears a hockey mask.